Well, a very unusual sort of ability was momentarily, a very short while, reported by Paramahansa that he could see, he was indoors, but he could see right the way down the street in all directions panoramically around him. And I think it was the case. He could see anywhere further that he wanted to see. Now this sounds, an absurd type of ability, but if you think of it, what we see is translated into thought. If the thoughts exist and you can tap into them, a bit like the Akashic record of what has been everywhere, right back, every detail into the past. Well, if you can tap into that, the fund of information is simply there. You see it. The situation, the scene. And one can imagine that situation too, for seeing anything anywhere, if you had access to the common mind, assuming such exists, that actually does provide the thoughts that we have. With a thing like sight, we assume, I think, that something like the light reflected from the object affects the retina, which sends information, signals, thoughts, handled by the brain. But perhaps not. Perhaps the information is simply received here and translated by a common brain, which then gives the information in the form that the brain can handle. And so you see what you're looking at. In other words, it might be rather more indirect than we suppose. If it's the case that all information is stored, if you like, in the ether, whatever you like to call it, what we call space, that the whole thing is mind, everywhere, we're in the mind, then it would be a bit pointless having local, like a PC ability, laptop computer, dealing with sight, when, it's duplicating what's available without having such. All we need is a good transmitting and receiving brain, and perhaps the complexity of the brain is more concerned with such. And yes, we are limited to what we think of as normal vision, not the Paramahansa extreme experience that he had once or twice. Because, that's part of our restriction, confinement here, appropriate to who we are as, if you like, children of God, as opposed to fully fledged adults. But we can then imagine situations where we have exceptional access and we see far into the distance and the other side of walls and all the rest of it. So coming back to it, all we need is the thought appropriate. Not the direct signal coming to us, but the signals are there, if you like, the light being reflected off in every direction by any object that's reflecting light, and what it would look like from a particular perspective, point of view, where your physical body is at the minute. And you tap into this information and you see it. In fact, you can see it even when it's obstructed by an object, because you can see it closer or further away. You can see both the near and the far at the same time. And depending how much of, if you like, the universal thought you have access to, you can handle such a complex and superabundant wealth of information that you don't normally have to cope with. Of course, if it is indeed a common brain throughout the universe, that thought is omnipresent, the mind of God, if you like, is omnipresent, then of course intuitions, visions of the past, visions of the future could be accessed in certain rare circumstances perhaps, but under certain conditions. And indeed spiritual training, purity of mind, purity of purpose, and certain values in particular may indeed give us extraordinary access to the, I think I'll call it Akashic record, or the Akashic view really, although that was, I think I want to say really though, God's mind, our Heavenly Father's mind. You know, you get close to someone like Mum or your sweetheart, you get to know what they're thinking to some extent. Intuitively, you've got an idea how they would react to this, and you look at their face and you think, oh, I know what he's thinking now, you know, what she's thinking, and so forth. And there we seem to have access because of a great affinity with our partner, or our parent, or our twin. Lovely, isn't it? And more things in heaven and earth than you or I have ever dreamed. Wow. Thank you, Heavenly Dad. When I first came across this sort of notion of vision, theory of vision, if you like, from reading Lobsang Rampa, The Opening of the Third Eye. I think it's in that one of his books, one of them anyway, where he says that a blind monk, or several of them, they could still see when they went into, if you like, using the third eye within. They could see everything then, even though they were blind as regards normal sight. And of course the whole idea of the third eye is that it's the spiritual eye of reaching into wisdom and, well, I suppose in the Hindu sense it would be relating to Brahma. In the Buddhist sense it's to do with enlightenment. In the Jesus story sense, he lifted up his eyes to heaven and said, Father. What do you mean he lifted up his eyes? Do you mean he looked up at the sky? I don't think so. I think he looked to that point between the eyebrows, the forehead there. In some sense within. He was talking to God direct. Look, I don't know. But I think it's so. Yes. But whatever. What are visions? They're seeing things that, in a physical sense, well, are not matched to anything physical. But nonetheless, you've sort of seen it, and you can see through it even, of course. But you've still seen it, whether it be an angel, a spirit, or whatever. Back to this thing, aren't we? Reality. Thoughts are the reality that you deal with. You don't deal with whatever's out there that we call reality, the environment. It affects your senses, and your senses make of it the thoughts that you have. And you deal with the thoughts and respond accordingly. And we hope your actions match up with whatever is out there in the, if you like, objective world, and affects it for good, not for harm. And we make mistakes because we're kids, spiritually speaking, children of God. Would you want to risk thinking anything else? I don't think so. Thank you, Heavenly Dad.